Welcome everyone to another week of Lunch Money. This is brought to you by Sharesies. At Sharesies, our purpose is to create the most financially empowered generation.
So for those of you who are new to Lunch Money, we do these every Thursday at lunchtime, and it's a place where you as investors can hear from some of the people leading companies available on Sharesies and other investing experts.
Lunch Money is also available as a podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Please, if you're listening to the podcast, take a moment to leave a rating and comment on Apple Podcasts. We'd really appreciate it. My name's Leighton. I'm one of the co-founders and co-CEOs of Sharesies.
And I'm Alice. I'm a financial analyst here at Sharesies. So just a reminder that if you do have any questions, you can submit them through the Ask a Question button down below. But don't leave questions in the discussion area as they're likely to be missed.
Quick legal disclaimer, we don't give any personalised advice here. Everything we say is our own view, and we like to keep it pretty generic, and that goes for everyone speaking today. Also, please be kind and respectful towards our speakers and also your fellow viewers. Otherwise, we have to give you the boot, and we don't really want to have to do that.
Cool. So today we are joined by David Darling, who is the CEO of Pacific Edge. Pacific Edge is a Dunedin-based company that's listed on the NZX, and it specialises in developing cancer diagnostic tests. So welcome, David.
Hi, everybody. I'm just coming up online. There we go. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about Pacific Edge and this magnificent 20-year overnight success.
I love that phrase. Thanks so much for joining us, David. I could do a bit of an intro here. I've been doing a bit of reading of you over the last few days, but I think probably, given we've got you here, it's best that you're doing it. So if you could tell us a little bit about who you are, how you ended up becoming the CEO of Pacific Edge, and anything else that you think the people listening might be interested in about you today.
Thanks. Thanks very much. So as outlined, yes, I am the CEO of Pacific Edge Limited. It's a global diagnostics company. We started our life we formed the company in 2001. We got underway in 2002 and we listed almost immediately. So I came to the company, we were just getting going. We had a very small team of people, and I came from a background of big corporate. I had spent a large part of my career in Fletcher Challenge, a Fortune 500 company, operating in some very exciting spaces in technology. And I've spent most of my career involved in the commercialization of innovation. So the innovation process itself, and then how do you get those things that come through? How do you nurture those things? How do you build the right environment? And then how do you get them all the way through to being market ready or utilizable inside your organization? And I was just talking to the Sharesies team a little bit earlier on about some of the things that we were doing in a previous life that involved cloning trees and optimizing individual genotypes to the growing environment and some of the slick things you can do and some of the genetic engineering things. And for a lot of people, genetic engineering is a really a tough word, but once you get to understand a little bit more about what's going on there, it's kind of like an accelerated breeding and nothing really to be feared. But of course, there'll be many views on that. So Pacific Edge started out. There was, I guess, a number of catalysts, but there was the death of a 6-year-old girl caused from a complication caused by cancer. And the parents were very keen to be catalytic in helping get something like this going. And they asked the question of us, if there were better tools for cancer, would the prognosis for our daughter have been better? And the answer to that, of course, is yes. And at the time, everybody really realized that cancer, the tools and technologies for detecting and managing cancer were really poor. And, we often call them caveman because they were very, very, rudimentary. It's just a sign of the times. And while we were getting going, there was a blue sky hypothesis that we held that tumor cells would express genes differently from normal cells. Now, nobody knew this, but this was our hypothesis, and the human genome was just being sequenced. So we figured that this was eminently testable, and we were the guys to do it. So a bunch of scientists looking to validate this hypothesis and build some new tools that were going to be genomically based. And so we set out to, first of all, prove this. And with the human genome being sequenced, there was a company set up in Germany called MWG Oligonucleotides. And we went across there and we bought some packets of the 32,000 genes in the human genome. And these were short copies of each of the genes. They were 50 base pairs long. And we built a robot in our company to pinprint these onto glass slides. So we had a glass slide with 32,000 genes on it. And we took tissue and from the tumor and the normal cell from hundreds of patients in 5 cancers: gastric, colorectal, endometrial, melanoma, and bladder. And, we figured that we would get one of these things to work. So this was the goal. And we spent the first 3.5 years of our lives building this great database around these expression patterns. And you can think about this as multiple lights flashing green, orange, yellow, and red. And these sort of denote the rates of changes of these 32,000 genes as they get switched on partially or fully. And we mapped all this and put it into our database. And after 3.5 years, we decided, well, that's enough. Let's go into this database and see if we can pull out some of these signatures, these gene signatures. And so we did that. And we went in and there was an aha moment, which is like, wow, we've proven this hypothesis. And there is, in fact, genes that are being overexpressed in tumor cells that are not being overexpressed in normal cells. And there were some that were being underexpressed as well. So this was really an aha moment. We knew then that we had something of really significance here, and nobody really knew about us. We're traveling under the radar. We're way down here in New Zealand. And we had a band of great early investors. They stuck with the company. They understood this opportunity. Some came in and just wanted to invest because we're doing cancer research and this was going to be something great and there's a bit more visibility. And of course, back then there was no venture capital funds. There's just these handful of early stage investors. And so we had to list on the New Zealand Stock Exchange in order to get going. And so we became straight out of the blocks. We're into this mainstream listed company process. And it's very good for you because it teaches you some disciplines that you wouldn't otherwise have if maybe you were a privately held company. And so we were off down that route, and it started a process of milestone delivery, and the company morphed a lot because our initial plan was that, hey, we were going to use these. We scientists were going to be able to do this, generate these signatures, and license them to the blue chip diagnostics companies, and then live happily ever after on the royalties. And that wasn't the case going to be. We took the first cancer that we wanted to take to the market was in fact bladder cancer, and we took it to these guys, Roche and Siemens and Abbott, and they all said the same thing. This is like, wow, this is a really cool outcome, but you're way ahead of the curve. We're not doing this yet. How about you go back, run up some clinical data, take the risk out of this, and then we'll license it. And we said, okay, well, fine. What is that licensing going to look like? And they said, well, that'll be a single digit royalty. And we said, a low single digit royalty. And we said, I don't think so. There's a lot of money at stake here, and our investors are not going to be happy with that. So we came back, pitched to our board and our shareholders that we can, in fact, walk up the value chain. We can run this clinical study. If we get a good result, then we can move on out into this opportunity. And we did this study, and it was outstanding. We got a great outcome. And all in the while, we had been into these other 5 cancers, and we pulled out all of these signatures, and we started filing patents. And today we have a very big patent portfolio, probably the largest patent portfolio in the country. And it's a big investment for us, but it underpins the company, and it underpins how you do this. And so nobody had done this in quite this way, even thought about doing this in this way. So we'd done this work on tumor cells and normal cells. So this is solid tumor tissue. But to make this work, we couldn't do that on a patient because you're getting the stuff too late. So we wanted to have a non-invasive process. So we looked at this process from, in the nucleus, from the messenger RNA through to the cell cytoplasm and its conversion into DNA into messenger RNA, and then its conversion into proteins. And we said, well, okay, if we can find messenger RNA, we're catching this message on its way, and this is the molecule we want to work with. But there was a problem because messenger RNA is very labile. It gets chewed up very quickly. And then we thought, well, bladder cancer is the one for us because that's the most advanced. I guess we're going to have to get it from urine, and urine is the most degradative environment you could possibly think of to get these labile molecules out of. So how are we going to do this? So we had this great protected intellectual property around these genes that have been overexpressed, and we had no real way to get this thing to work. So we had to come up with another innovation. We had to generate this buffer and this secret source, which, is trade secreted. And we licensed a company in Germany to manufacture it, in Europe to manufacture it for us and put it into these little tubes under a vacuum. And but we had to build this. And it was another aha moment, because once we built this, and we could add the urine sample from the patient to this, and it would protect the messenger RNA and enable us to transport it back to the lab, giving us 2 weeks and up to 30 degrees in temperature, which was fantastic. And we could extract this high fidelity signal from this really crappy analyte called urine. So the combination of the genes and the ability to bring the sample back to a lab gave us this opportunity. But then that was just the start. Then we had to work out how to run this test at a commercial scale. So we had to sort of think about that. We built a prototype way of doing it. We had to find equipment off the shelf to run this RTQ PCR, reverse transcription quantitative PCR, and we chose the Roche equipment. We'd build it on another set of equipment. We had to transition it to that. We had to work out how to do this at scale. Then we had to work out how to do it at high throughput, and then build this lab. And so we did that on the floor below where we were operating in our research lab. And then eventually we had to do that for a large scale facility. We built one in the United States to service the US. So this whole time that we were building these prototypes, this model appeared in the US, where these small to medium enterprises were going through a completely different regulatory route called CLIA, C-L-I-A. It wasn't the FDA, and people only ever thought of the US as through the FDA. And so we had to learn about that, and we realized that this was the way to go. We pitched that this could be done and we could do it. And off the back of the fact that we had great results out of our initial clinical study, we managed to persuade everybody this was going to be a great thing. So now we are a bunch of scientists who are now about to embark on a cancer diagnostics company in the United States. And these are molecular diagnostics. They're non-invasive and they're completely novel. So we built this first product and we took it to the urologist, and the urologist said, wow, this is pretty cool. But actually, now that you've done this, and they asked us to do this, this is what they wanted. And then they said, we've actually got a few other problems. And so we had a look at what they were doing, and there was 8 different clinical needs. We thought, my God, this is worse than we ever thought. So we mapped them. We actually rolled out the clinical pathway, and we copied it out onto a big sheet of paper. And you need to print it on AO. It's huge. And we looked at this and we said, well, if we map all these 8 different clinical issues, we can actually fix these with 4 products. So we actually designed the products and we said, okay, let's make these things. And we already made one. We know how to do this. And so we set off and we made 4 of them. So today, we find ourselves in this really unique position where, there hadn't been any new diagnostic products commercially available in this space for 19 years. And all of a sudden we pop up, we're it. This test has, got outstanding performance. It performs. We've gone on to show in the latter years that it outperforms the gold standard. And now we're being wrapped into guidelines where we're only people who've ever built, a suite of tests that can be deployed across an entire clinical pathway. We basically undid the pathway. We threw out all this old junk and we put in these new sophisticated molecular diagnostics. So we're looking around and thinking, wow, we've got this huge competitive advantage, and we better, we're putting the hammer down as fast as we can go. But the whole thing about the medical and medical technology and the adoption into the medical systems is that it's all built on clinical evidence, and this is peer-reviewed, published evidence in tier 1 journals. And when your technology is as disruptive as what these tests are for bladder cancer, you're automatically up against some barriers. And so we were really, fighting the Goliath when we were going to the United States. And we chose the United States because they just can pay so much more money for this technology. And as everyone knows, the retail price for Cxbladder in the United States is $2,995. New Zealand, we're able to sell that at a fraction of the cost because, hey, we're New Zealanders. It's a really small market. And it's just absolutely stunning to see the New Zealand urologists. They lead the world. They stepped up. They stepped out into the brave new world. They adopted Cxbladder into their standard of care. They put us into the local guidelines, and they threw out the gold standard. And up until then, people are saying, well, particularly the financial analysts, are going, well, guys, can you convince us that this technology will actually work and that, maybe these urologists will use this? And surely you're not going to go head to head with the gold standard, because I can't see how you're going to be able to do this. It's so entrenched and they make money off this thing. And we said, well, of course, we're not going to go after the gold standard, all the while hoping that the test would in fact do this. So this was this process evolving out in front of us. And we were very conscious of the fact that if we'd stood up in front of the board in the day one and said, hey, look, by 2021, we'll be a $900 million market cap company. We'll have 4 products in the market. Urologists will no longer practice urology the way they were trained. I think they would have put us all in a straitjacket and taken us off to the bin. So, you actually had to manage that process. You had to bring people with you. And I mean, just all credibility to and all thanks to the shareholders that saw this opportunity and just stayed with us, and the recent passing of one of them, Sir Eon Edgar, there's others like Sir Stephen Tyndall. These guys, they put their money where their mouth is. They backed this company. They stayed with us. Every time we turned around to get some more money, they were helping. They were there helping. And there were many, many others. I could name many others, and they've become part of our family. It has been a very long journey. And, for anybody going down the medtech space, be prepared to invest a lot of money and time in building the foundations for your business, because that's where it starts and ends. We still invest a lot of money in our business. And, we just announced this morning the publication of another paper. It's in the Journal of Urology. It's the Tier 1 journal in the United States. It's the Journal of the American Urology Association. And it's a phenomenal paper. It's actually a watershed paper. We're really excited by it. And in that paper, we describe how you get this really unique phenomenon where you combine more than one of our products together and you get this compounded ability to be able to see into the person. So now we've got this unique tool where, somebody could be sitting at home in their pajamas with their slippers on and notice that they had blood in the urine, and we can get a sample from them. We can analyze it. It's a 2-hour process, a couple of days either side for the courier, the FedEx. And then we can provide that information back to, say, Kaiser Permanente. They can phone this guy up and say, hey, look, this technologist said you have and not only do you have bladder cancer and you didn't know that, you've got a high impact tumor and we need to see you immediately. Please come in. And there's never been an ability to do that. So this paper that we published, that was published on our behalf, and the authors on this journal are all key opinion leader authors. They sit on the guidelines committees in the United States. One's a leading urologist at Kaiser Permanente, one of our recent very large customers that we've signed up in 2020. So it's been a phenomenal journey of innovation, commercialization, and building value. And it's just really now starting to be the tip of the iceberg in terms of extracting that value. So we had a great year in 2020. We went into COVID and no one really knew what was going to happen here. This was, it was extremely satisfying. It was just amazing to see all of our staff stand up and be counted and continue working. Our staff in the labs were running, full time, full noise. They were essential service people, all execs and everything. The rest of us went home. We operated from home. We ran our business. And we saw some interesting things. We saw that the urologists really, they didn't know what to do. They effectively ran around like chooks with their heads cut off. Normally these people are over 65 years of age. And of course, these are COVID at-risk people. So what do? We can't bring them in anymore. And you got the Director General of Health running around saying, hey, you guys have got to keep bringing these people in because you might miss the cancer. And if you miss the cancer, well, they could progress and then these guys are lost. And so, if people are under treatment, you've got to continue the treatment, et cetera, et cetera. So they didn't quite know what to do. But fortunately for us, this buffer I talked about before that was in a tube, it's in a box, a urine sampling box. And we can send that out to people in their own homes. And in New Zealand's really lucky because under the Medicines Act, you can go online and buy this straight off the company and we'll send it to you at home. You pee in the cup, you insert the tube into the cup, it's under vacuum, it sucks out its own sample. You shake it, you put it into the courier bag or the FedEx bag, you fill in the form, and you fill in and say who your healthcare professional is, and we'll send the result to the healthcare professional. And we've also got a law in New Zealand that says, hey, you can actually get this result yourself. You just have to fill in a bit more information, and we'll send it. And of course, don't forget to fill in your credit card details, of course. So this was a very cool thing for New Zealanders to be able to participate in. But this urine sampling system became really quite a pivot point for the company during the COVID window. So for those guys that were using and had already committed to Cxbladder, they knew what it could do. They suddenly, it's like a light bulb moment, and they said, aha, well, why don't we just send these sample systems out to their patients in their home, and we'll get the sample, and we'll get Pacific Edge to pick up the samples. Well, in fact, we'll get Pacific Edge to phone these people and tell them what's happening, and they can manage that whole patient interface. And so all of a sudden we're managing their patients. And they call us now a white glove service. So we've gone from being scientists to, molecular diagnostics people to people with white gloves on, picking up samples for urine and giving people their results. So just before COVID cracked in, there was 4 very big organizations in the US who had, excuse me, I'm just losing my earpiece, had been working with Cxbladder, and they're already cottoned on to this feature of sending the sample systems out to people in their homes. And so they said, well, we've got these remote people, and we've got people who travel 2 hours to get to San Francisco, and we know they're probably quite low risk, but they're going to wait in the queue in the clinic for a couple of hours. We're going to look after them for an hour, then they're going to drive home for 2 hours. It's like a day. And we can just send them a sample system home, and we'll get the results. So for 4 months prior to COVID, these guys were building this process, and they were testing it, and it was working really well. And they were delighted. So were the patients. And so when COVID struck, they just wound up the gas, and everybody was getting these tests. So for us, this is great. So in New Zealand, the New Zealanders suddenly also said the same thing. Hey, we're leading the world. We're really invested in this. We've already added it to our standard of care. We know how it works. And we had guys, and the interesting thing is there are urologists and healthcare providers who have a shine on one product, so Cxbladder Triage. And these guys said, wow, we'll adopt Monitor as well. So they reached over and they grabbed Monitor and they put that into mainstream commercial use. So we saw an increase in the use of our tests in New Zealand during the COVID window. So we came out of the back end of the COVID window and closed out the financial year, and the rest of world market, which is mostly New Zealand, it was up 107% on test throughput through the lab, which is a measure of test use. And the revenue was up 139%. So just a phenomenal outcome, because these businesses took a tank when the COVID struck, because these guys didn't know what to do. They stopped. And then they suddenly realized that they can actually get on and do this stuff really well. So, for the US, it was a big tank. And of course, we took most of that year to rebuild the business. So we finished just a little bit under in terms of lab throughput, 6% under. During the year, because we'd spent many thousands of hours in airplanes building relationships, we were able to conclude 2 deals. We had been talking to Kaiser Permanente. Kaiser, they are the US's largest single validation customer. They are an integrated healthcare provider, so everybody's on salary, doctors, urologists. They own their own insurance company. They own their own hospitals and clinics. And they have 12.8 million lives under coverage. So they're 2.5 times the size of New Zealand. This is one corporate. And these guys, we'd been working with them for about 6 years. They'd been doing due diligence on our technology for 4 years. And everybody wants to work with Kaiser because they do this due diligence. And if you get through and you get accepted, this is phenomenal.
So that's sorry. I was going to say that's a huge milestone for your company. And then, recently with them adopting the second CX product as well, that's great. And then you've got, most of your customers are over in the US. What I was wondering actually is, are there any other key markets that you're trying to target at the moment?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Alice. Thank you for that. So obviously the US is big, 329 million people, 300 million covered lives, no new technology in the space, a great awareness and adoption of genomic tests. They pay a lot of money for the tests. But then when you come down our way, and of course, your home market's always important, but New Zealand's really small. So, but they lead the world. They're just right out there, they're going for it. And so then we're looking across at Australia and thinking, well, that's really just, a backward version of our homeward market. So let's get those guys too. And they're being, that we're working on that right now. But we also looked up into Southeast Asia and we said, well, what does that look like? So we've invested, 4.5, 5 years of time and energy up there in Southeast Asia. And there's around, the way we look at the world up there, there's around 620 million people, and there's 300 million people that are in these cities. They're the metro guys. They're in close proximity to healthcare. We can't quite have as much reach at this stage into people in the coconut plantations and the rubber plantations and the guys in the rural settings, but that's obviously where we want to go eventually. But so you're looking at around 300 million people. When you compare that to 300 million lives under coverage in the US, and you're going, hey, this is roughly the same size. The price is not quite as good, but it's, way better than New Zealand, and it's, very doable. So we've got a beachhead in Singapore, and today we have commercial operations in New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, and the United States. We have a total of 75 people on our payroll now. We have 45 in the US, and the balance of them are in New Zealand, with one in Singapore, and there's one in Australia. And there's a few features about how we go about our business that are a little bit different. We focus on the institutional accounts. And I've just sort of portrayed how big Kaiser is, and there's many more. There's a few more Kaiser size opportunities in the US, and many more big ones. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But if I come back to New Zealand and say, well, right now we just announced 2 days ago an agreement with Northland District Health Board and Mahitahi, which is the primary healthcare part of that operating zone. So we're providing this technology to Maori people and to regional people, where there's a lot of people over the age of 50. But Northland became the 12th DHB to sign up an agreement, and we're reaching around 67, 68% of New Zealand's population now with Cxbladder. They're under contract, and so New Zealand's rolling out, and this is all based around institutional accounts. And people asked us, and they said, how many salespeople did you use to crack that? And the answer was just one. And then they said, well, how many you got now? And we said, well, we've got none. We took that guy because he's so good, and we put him in Australia. It was kind of like a penance for being so good in New Zealand. You get to go and do it all again in Australia. And so he's making great progress in Australia. And but in the United States, it's a different market, and we have a direct sales force there of 25 people. Midway through the year, we were running at 16. We grew out our sales force to 25. We're looking to push that a little further soon, and we're being so well paid that it doesn't take much for people now for these sales executives to start becoming a positive contributor to our bottom line with far less tests than was originally the case. So it's a profitable model. And so we're going to continue to roll that out. But we focus on these institutional accounts, which is very different to what some of these other molecular companies do. And there's not very many of them out there. There's only a handful that have been fortunate enough to develop products and go to market. But institutional accounts, the Kaiser Permanentes, there's Intermountain and Geising are very similar, integrated healthcare providers, we call them. And there's Henry Ford and a couple of others. Sharp is another one. And then there's the very big academic centers. You don't see this in New Zealand, but for example, USC, University of Southern California, massive healthcare business associated with that academic institute. UCSF, San Francisco, UCLA, and then there's the big ones like the Moffitt, Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, Memorial Sloan Kettering. These are big, huge organizations. Johns Hopkins, et cetera. MD Anderson. And so they're all on our list. And you'll see in our presentations that we make it a half year and full year, and we've listed these out. And these are the guys we're after. Because when you get them, like New Zealand, you don't have to have a sales force that goes and talks to them. So we don't have any salespeople talking to Kaiser Permanente. Our sales force, because we've set that up as an institutional account, and we can work with those guys without having salespeople call on them. So very different mode to market. So the United States, 5 million opportunities in the United States. It translates to roughly a market opportunity of 5 billion for our company. We're at an early stage of skinning the cat, and we have an a priori substantial competitive advantage there. It's very difficult for anyone to sort of come at us. But there will be competition, and there is people popping up, a single biomarker here and a few there, and they try to get a test together and they try to find the money to get to market, but it's extremely hard. you look at our trajectory.
Yours is the type of industry that I'm hoping there's lots of competition in. With the saving lives stuff, which is really exciting. Hey, David, I'm just really conscious of time here, and there's a few questions from the people listening as well. But just before we get into those, I was wondering if you could, has it been just over 20 years, I think, and you're about to move on from, or as the role of leading the company. You'll be sort of there as an advisor and a big supporter still. But what's the feeling about that? From your point?
It's always tough. Yeah, it's kind of I guess it's akin to when your children grow up and leave home. It's that a little bit of sense of loss, but it's a big family, and I'll be, as you said, I'll be part of that family. I'll be watching from the sidelines, and I'll be actively engaged in a bunch of things like helping bring through the new products that are coming through the pipe. And so, I'll be hunting and fishing, and otherwise lazing on the beach, as you do down in Dunedin. It's a cultural capital of the South Island, and it's a great place to be. 2 hours from the Hobbits.
Laying on the beach.
Yeah, laying on the beach,
Yeah, that's maybe a bit later in the year.
The seals and the icebergs. Yeah.
Right. Hey, thanks so much for all that. Was great summary. I know there's some cool comments come through as well. I'll just cover a few of the questions that we try to do these as quick fire. So if you can try keep to like around 30 seconds, that would be great so we can get through them. Sure. First one is actually referring to financial statements. So referring to page 13 of the financial statements, re unrecognised revenue, the company is in discussion with Novitas, Solutions Inc., who administer the health insurance for the CMS, seeking reimbursement for tests performed prior to 30 June 2020 for patients covered by CMS. Tests performed for CMS since commencement of the six-letter test being used up to 30th of June 2020, total 22,600. This was also flagged as an audit issue on page 39. Are you able to provide a timeline to when this might be resolved?
The short answer to that is no, we don't have a timeline, but it is something that's obviously germane to our heart. Firstly, you need to understand how we could have 22,000 tests that were unpaid for. We've invoiced the CMS for these. So when you front up at a urologist's office and they ask you, have you got a CMS coverage? And we say no. And they go, well, are you getting one? We go, yes. And they say, well, will you cover the CMS patients? Because they won't use your technology, and you're legally obliged to provide the service to all people. So if a CMS patient comes into a urologist's office and uses our test, we run the test and we invoice the CMS. And over that period of time, while we were looking to get our CMS coverage, we invoiced 22,000 tests. So they owe us. Mm-hmm. And so there is some precedent around getting that, but it could end up being nothing, and we'll progressively pick our way through this. They're generally long processes. It could be a couple of years, and we're well into it. It will involve the national office of the CMS and all relative parties that we can bring to bear that would help us. You got to do it very carefully because you can't estrange yourself from these people, particularly Novitas, who are the contractors administering the process for the CMS. So working on it, but it could be zero. So, anything we get is an upside.
Great, thank you. The next one is there an estimated rollout date for CX colorectal?
Yes, thanks. CX colorectal was something that we were working on with. We obviously have filed all these patents and the various other four other cancers. But we think that probably as we go through the pipe, we may not go to colorectal. We may, in fact, go to something that's operating in the same drainage channel, so kidney. And there's a bunch of reasons why we'd probably want to do kidney. We're specialists in managing urine. We know how to talk to urologists. We have all the infrastructure in place. And there's some very compelling reasons around kidney. So at this stage, we're not working on anything new. We're about to embark on some exploratory studies in a couple of areas. We have our hands full with our CX bladder products, and we haven't finished skinning bladder cancer. There are some opportunities there, and we're pretty cognizant about, we know how to get them. We've got the protocols, the techniques, the technology, and the wherewithal, the know-how to do this. So watch the space.
Great, thanks, David. Just reading through a bunch of the other questions there, I think you've largely covered them around some of the growth things, bit of history on the last month, and I think your question there probably is the similar answer to ones around melanoma and other diagnostic. Is that roughly right? Not wanting to speak for you.
No, it's true. Yeah, that's very much the case. it's nice to be in that place, and you need to protect those assets. That's why we continue to invest in the patents. But we also look at where you can make the biggest difference. Obviously, reaching out to the same customer with another product is the easier opportunity. And if you're pulling more opportunity out of the same process, so you've got the urine sampling system, you can take that urine, you can look at kidney, you can look at prostate, you can look at bladder, and there are other organs now that will have cancers. And we found out through the course of our journey that the body is really good at taking oligonucleotides, the DNAs and the messenger RNAs, and putting them in the bladder. It's the waste system. And we didn't really know that before. The world didn't know that. They didn't know anything about circulating tumor cells and all these other complexities of cancer that we now know about.
Mm-hmm. That's been super interesting. Could ask a lot of questions about this stuff. I was thinking one of the other, if there are upsides to COVID, of which there are not too many, but there are some, but I can understand a bit more of what you're talking about, particularly when you're speaking about messenger RNA and stuff, which I think that's the same stuff the Pfizer vaccine stuff is based off. And like all this science, mixing the science and the business world, sometimes it's very easy to think about them as polar opposites, because you very seldom, if you're in a situation of having to worry too much about your health, care too much about your finances, I think is the thing. But it's really cool to see such investment going into this type of thinking. Congratulations and everything. Alice, I might just hand over to you to wrap us up, but thanks so much, David.
Thanks very much, Leighton. Thanks, Alice.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, David, for your time. This has been so fascinating to learn all about the history behind Pacific Edge and where you're at today. I've certainly learned a lot, and then some of the words you've been throwing around, I've been taken back to sort of biology at high school, which has been interesting. Once again, thank you for your time. Next Thursday on Lunch Money, we'll be joined by Ilan Israel, who's from Beta Shares. That's an Australian fund manager who provides a range of exchange traded funds. So tune in if you're keen to hear more about Beta Shares, ETFs, and the Australian market. You can register through the link in the chat. But otherwise, enjoy your weekend. Thanks again for listening. Thanks, David. Thanks, Leighton. And we'll catch you next week.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you all.